Well, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing with you what I read in March. I had an amazing reading month in terms of quality. I only read 6 books, but the books that I read for the most part were incredible. Some of them are probably going to be on my best books of the year list at the end of the year. I would be surprised if they weren't. I'm realizing now that I'm sitting down that put a little too much bronze on the neck doesn't match the face, but we're going with it. As you know, it was Irish Readathon, and I did read a ton of Irish books, and they were all good. Okay, we're going to start with the first Irish book that I read. This is Homestretch by Graham Norton. Now, I listened to this on audio, and Graham Norton himself narrated it. If you don't know who he is an incredible entertainer. You'll probably recognize him. He has a show that is hilarious. He interviews all sorts of celebrities, but he is also the most incredible writer. And this is his latest book, Homestretch. Homestretch follows Connor after a horrific car accident that leaves 3 people dead. Since that fateful day, Connor has really struggled. This entire little Irish town is not cruel to him, but they are not embracing him. He has said that he was behind the wheel, and so a lot of people do not appreciate him there. So he does up and leave to go to, I think it's London and then eventually New York City. And it's about his experience along the way. This is such a powerful story. It is a sad story at times. There are so many twists and turns. That's one thing that I feel like Graham Norton does so well, is the amount of twists and turns that are in here. You know, I think sometimes people think of literary fiction and think that it's going to be, I don't know, too serious. Maybe these are just my own assumptions, but like, this man writes literary fiction and there are just as many twists in here as there are in like your best thriller. I also felt so attached to the main character, Connor. I felt very protective of him, and it just got more and more protective as the pages were turned. I felt so protective of this man. It follows him. It also follows his sister, who I came to really love, which I was surprised by considering how I felt about her in the beginning. Loved this book, every bit of it. 5 stars all the way. Please go and read this. I also read The Keeper by him, or A Keeper by him, and adored that as well. Like, in my mind, he can do no wrong. Another 5-star Irish book that I read this March was A Ladder to the Sky by John Boyne. Wow. Okay, so I did read The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne, and I actually recently bought that for my dear friend Rachel, who came down with COVID, and I was like, I'm gonna get that for you in case it perks up your spirits a little bit. In any case, very incredible writer. I've read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by him as well. He just is a really beautiful writer. A Letter to the Sky follows a novelist named Maurice, and he struggles not to write, but to come up with a plot that is deserving of his writing. He just has a really hard time imagining a plot. He is also probably one of the most horrible, despicable characters that I've read in literature. Like, up there, top 5. He's a nasty piece of work. And it's funny because he absolutely uses people to get stories. He meets a very famous author as a young man, and he follows him around. And he absolutely uses this man to derive stories from. And it's funny because at the beginning of the book, I disliked him, Maurice, as a character, but I didn't really hate him. By the end of the book, I was like, you deserve the worst in the world. He's like a psychopath and a narcissist. I think without doubt, he really is a nasty piece of work. That said, I was riveted. I could not put this book down. I needed to know what was going to happen next. Again, I listened to this on audio. The audio was incredible, like highly recommend. I will say, for the most part in this book, you read from the perspectives of the people that he is working, living alongside. So the first part the narrator is this very prolific older author that Maurice is following around. And then you go on to all of the other people that Maurice follows around. And I really liked that. I thought that was a great way to look at this man. You do eventually get Maurice's perspective, but wow. I really love John Boyne's writing. I do. Now, we started on the high. That was a 5-star. We're starting on a high, but now we're going a little dip. A little dip. This is Stalker. This is the 5th in the Lars Kepler Junalina series. This follows Juna as well as a doctor that we met at the first book, Dr. Eric Bark, something like that. We meet them working on a very upsetting case where the police are receiving videos of a woman and she's like doing normal things, like putting on a sock or something like that. So they'll receive this video, and then like very soon after, you receive a video showing this woman dead, or they find the woman dead, something along those lines. So we have a psychopath, a serial killer, killing off these women. And we follow Junalina and the team trying to track this person down. Now, I will say, like, it's absolutely a very violent series. Like, Lars Kepler, they do not shy away from violence. So if that makes you queasy, don't ever pick them up. Ever, ever, ever. But I feel like this book was a little flat for me. Yes, it was shocking, but I barely remembered what was going on. Like, it was sometimes hard to flip the pages. And so I just gave it 3 stars. It was just okay to me. It was okay. Next is Still Life by Sarah Winman. I really did enjoy this book. I, again, listened to this on audio and I gave it 4 stars. This was one of Simon from Savage Reads, his favorite books, I think, ever. And it's like holds a very dear place in his heart. And so I knew that I had to pick it up because I trust Simon and I love Simon, and I completely agree with him. This was a beautiful, beautiful book. It follows 2 people who meet in an Italian like wine cellar as the bombs are being dropped. It's World War II. So we meet Ulysses, who is a British soldier, and then we meet Evelyn, who is kind of a middle-aged woman, and they have this one night together with a bunch of other people around them, but they have these conversations and they're just linked from that one night, and then they go off in their separate ways. And we follow Ulysses go back to his home where his family owns a pub, and him trying to go back to his normal life and struggling, but also being surrounded by all of these incredible friends and lovers. And the characters themselves were so fleshed out and felt so real and were layered, and they had faults and they had strengths, and I really loved them. We also follow Ulysses does go back to Italy in this book. I won't say why or how that transpires, but we witness the flood of, I think it was Venice that flooded at one point, I think in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. And we follow the events of that period. And I thought it was really incredible. Now, the only reason that I ended up giving it 4 stars instead of 5 was, and I can't really fault Sarah Winman for this. So you really are entrenched in Ulysses' experience and his story after the war. And then at the very end of the book, you get Evelyn's perspective of what happened before the war, and after the war, and you get her perspective there. And I felt like it should have been intermixed into the story, and you should have gone from Ulysses' perspective to her perspective and back and forth and back and forth. But I actually don't know how well that would have worked. Like, I don't know where I would have placed her story within the grand scheme of things of this book. I don't know. I don't have an answer. But it felt like kind of tacked on at the end. And maybe I need to read it again and have some perspective on it. But yeah, it just felt a little bit odd and tacked on. But gorgeous book. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. I loved it. The worst book that I read in March was The Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner. This wasn't a terrible book or anything. I feel like I can be a little bit, I guess, harsh with my star ratings at times. But I just felt like this needed, the plot felt dull. So the Jane Austen Society follows a group of people living in the English village of Chawton after the Second World War. And it is the village where Jane Austen lived up upon her death. Like, I think she wrote 2 or 3 books there, and then she died. And so we follow this village trying to keep her memory alive by keeping the books that were in her home in, you know, tip-top shape, and like basically keep her things for the sake of society in the future and the sake of her incredible writing. And so we are following a myriad of characters. Some of them live in this town. Most of them live in the town. One of them is a movie star who lives in America, who loves Jane Austen, and so she gets involved. And what I really didn't like about this book was I felt like a lot of it was quite safe and boring. I found a lot of it to be discussions about between the characters about like which Jane Austen book is your favorite, and like, oh, this experience feels so much like Elizabeth Bennet when she was, you know, dealing with Mr. Collins or something along those lines. And it just felt forced. It felt like it was forcing Jane Austen into this narrative when she was already there because it's the town where she wrote. There were snippets of them, you know, going through the books and finding, you know, letters and that kind of thing that showed Jane's history, and that was fine. I just feel like it wasn't really well thought out and felt more of like a I don't know, like, hey, if you're a Jane Austen fan, I'm gonna like kind of fool you into reading this book. Oh, I know that a lot of people do really, really like this book, so I don't want to, feel like everyone's mad at me right now. But it didn't work for me. So I gave it 2 stars. It was fine. It was a cute story. It just felt unnecessary. It felt unnecessary as a whole. And last but not least is my Patreon book of March. The last book of my Patreon, because I have decided to end Patreon. Patreon is no longer, which is sad, but necessary for this season of my life. All that to say, we read In the Woods by Tana French together. This is like an incredible Irish author. I ended up giving In the Woods 4 stars. This is the first in the Dublin Murder Squad series. I want to read the whole thing. Oh my goodness, it was really wonderful. So in this book, you follow 2 detectives. We follow Detective Ryan and we follow Detective Maddox. So Detective Ryan lived in a small town when he was little, and you discover that he was the only survivor of a terrible kidnapping, murder, we're not sure. So he and his two friends went out one summer, and Ryan, Detective Ryan as a child, was found in the woods, like covered in blood, gripping a tree for dear life, and his friends vanished. And never to be found again. And he has moved on in his life to become a detective. And in the same town, a new murder has occurred. And it is the murder of a young girl who was working to become a ballerina. She was going to be going to ballet school. I think she was 13 when she died, Katie. And they, Detective Ryan and Detective Maddox, take on the case. They're trying to figure out, was her death in relation to what happened to Ryan as a child? Like, are these strange things linked? Or, you know, there's a lot of construction going on in this area. Was there something going on there? What have you? What happened to this girl? And I was totally hooked, and there were a lot of twists and turns, but it is a slow burn read. I think a lot of people might be deterred from reading Tana French's work because it is such a slow burn. But what you get in return for that slow burn is a character development and characters that you really, really care about. I genuinely cared about Detective Ryan, even though I found him I was so mad at him towards the end. I will just say that. I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but I was very angry with him. But I cared, and it felt like these people were real. Detective Ryan and Detective Maddox had this like insane chemistry and like a little bit romantic at times. And I was like, what is going to happen with this team, this partnership? Yeah, the vibes between the people felt really, really real as well. I loved it, and I'm going to continue reading it. So I gave it 4 stars. Those are all of the books that I read in March. Not a ton, but really good books. And it's so exciting when you find a new series that you're going to read too. So stay tuned for more from the Dublin Murder Squad series on my channel. I hope that you guys are doing well. Let me know in the comments below what you guys read in March. Did you read anything good? I want to know. Did you read Irish books as well? Because it made me so happy and made me realize just how much incredible literature has come out of this small island, really. Like, it's just unbelievable. In any case, I'm going to move along. I actually think I might film my, I nearly said February wrap up. No, my April TBR right after this. So stay tuned. I'll talk with you very soon. Bye, guys.